We've got Gregor Paul of the New Zealand Herald back with us. Gregor, how you doing?
Oh, very well, thanks.
So the point that Royal Nugent was making there is that in the long run, a defeat now for Steve Hansen is actually not the worst thing that might have happened. It's not a bad way for the season to end. It's a bit of a kick up the ass and just a reminder that there are challenges out there that they're going to have to face in the future.
Oh, look, for sure. I mean, it's not a bad thing to get a reminder. But by the way, I don't actually think that the All Blacks needed a reminder of how good Ireland are. I don't think there was any doubt in their minds about what kind of contest they were going to be getting themselves into playing against Ireland. But it's good to get that, I don't know if it's a reality check, I'm not sure what I would call it, but it's a fairly sobering business for the All Blacks to wake up on a Sunday morning. It's unusual for them to look at a game and go, look, we were outplayed. You know, we were outthought, we were outplayed. Ireland were better in every department that you want to go through, not by much, but by enough to get the game won. And, you know, the thing for me was, and the great thing for everybody there was no refereeing controversies. It didn't swing on a decision by a referee. There was no injustice perceived by either team. It was just a classically good test match. Both teams went at each other, and in the end, you know, Ireland were better, and they took their one opportunity really to score. Brilliant try, and the All Blacks didn't take theirs, and Ireland go home the winners, and that'll hurt the All Blacks for quite a while, because they'll have to go back home now and think, you know, Ireland are better than we are right now. So what can we do in the next 10, 11 months to make sure that when we go to a World Cup, we're the better team?
Speaking of which, in the aftermath, Hansen said that we're trying to transform our style or change our style from one way of playing to another, and we're still stuck a little bit in the old style. What's he talking about? What is he trying to achieve, and what does the new version of the All Blacks look like versus the old version?
Well, good question. We asked him and we didn't really get much of an answer beyond that. He wasn't really too keen to give it away. Like, I don't really know. I think there was a couple of things in that game, I think, probably where I felt the All Blacks were a wee bit predictable, and Ireland knew what was coming at them, didn't they? They had Brodie Retallick lined up in the middle of the field, and you young lock there, whose name escapes me, James Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, he was good. You know, he lined them up. Devin Toner was good, and they knew where the All Blacks were coming at, and they were good enough and physical enough to repel that challenge. So in terms of what the All Blacks are doing, we're not really, I don't think it'll be anything major. You know, probably at their level, it'll be something subtle. It'll be moving the way that they attack first up. I don't really know what he was talking about there, but obviously in their world, it's causing them a bit of grief that whatever transition they are trying to make, they're not doing it particularly well. And I think that's probably true because they haven't looked quite right for the last half of this year. They haven't really flowed. They haven't got that attack game going, particularly against South Africa. They struggled against England. They didn't get it going either. So there is some kind of transition going on there. I suspect it's quite subtle, and they haven't found what it is that they're trying to do yet. So how significant that is, we'll find out. I mean, I wouldn't doubt that the All Blacks have got more in them. I think we'll see them improve. There's no doubt about that. They always go away after a defeat and come back a wee bit stronger. But how significant it is, we'll have to wait to see, I think.
In terms of Beauden Barrett, you are writing this morning in the New Zealand Herald about it might now be time for him to become a fullback at international level. What's your thinking behind that, and how likely is that to happen? Because we saw it in a small portion of the game at the weekend.
Well, I mean, it happens a lot anyway. In terms of like, there's a kind of a genuine move on his part in the back half of most Test matches when they bring Mo'unga off the bench. Barrett goes back to fullback, and that's been the way really for quite some time now. And if you look at the way that the All Blacks set themselves up, Barrett plays quite a lot at fullback anyway. I mean, the numbers on their backs in the All Blacks between 10 and 15, but they're not hugely different what they want both players to do. When McKenzie plays there, they both come up as first receiver, they both drop back. So I just think at the moment the All Blacks need a little bit more balance in their back line. They're not as composed in the face of that kind of defensive onslaught that Ireland produced. You know, they get shut down a little bit. And I think Mo'unga is probably the better player at dealing with that traffic, at making those decisions on the run. But the beauty of playing Barrett on the field and Mo'unga on the field is that they're the two best playmakers in the team. And that's kind of what my point is. Whether one wears 10 and one wears 15, I actually wouldn't get too hung up about that. I think the point I'm trying to make is that Mo'unga needs to come into the team and be on the field from the start and give the All Blacks that dual playmaking role that Mackenzie can't quite give them, because I think Ireland exposed him a wee bit. The kicking game was very good. He's not a big man. He really isn't. He's tiny, and he got found out a wee bit. He's brave, he's courageous, he goes for it, but I just think, sadly, to play Test match rugby as a fullback, you have to be a wee bit bigger than him.
Gregor, in terms of who might come into the All Blacks team who was missing on Saturday, like maybe Sonny Bill Williams gets his form back and finds a place in the centre. Are there many other changes that, say, all things being equal, we're on the verge of a World Cup? Is this largely the team, or are there significant changes, do you think?
I don't think there'll be significant changes. I don't think you'd want to be thinking that 11 months out of the World Cup you haven't identified the wider group of players that you're going to take. I mean, clearly you want to have done that as a coach at this stage. Sam Kane's back home injured, but Artie Savea played particularly well at open side, so I'm not sure that would make a huge difference. Sonny Bill, you're right, if he can get himself back into form, his offloading would make the All Blacks a more dangerous team. I don't recall them getting an offload away against Ireland. And being able to stress the defence by putting someone through, on the back of an offload to get one step beyond the defence. So we didn't see that. They're not quite set up in the back three. They've got Waisaki Noholo, who hasn't played for a wee while. Whether he comes into the team and gives them something, not sure. But I think, and I wouldn't for 1 minute want to take anything away from Ireland's outstanding victory, but I think probably Sam Whitelock was on his last legs. He's had a huge year. He doesn't have a lot of energy left in the tank. And Retallick was a wee bit empty because he's hardly played this year as well, and drained himself at Twickenham and just couldn't back it up. And that's not to take anything away from Ireland. That's just to say, I think if you get those two back at full noise, you get a different kind of All Black type five coming at you. So maybe they're a wee bit jaded at the end of a long year. That's not to take away from Ireland, but that's maybe an area where the All Blacks have got a bit of upside to come.
You've said there that obviously the All Blacks were quite aware of the challenge that Ireland would bring, and they're more aware than most other nations about the particular challenges that a Joe Schmidt side would bring. But particularly given the manner of the win, do you think that those who run rugby in New Zealand will now be more eager to get Joe Schmidt into the camp, and perhaps as a future head coach? I mean, I say as a future head coach, I mean after the next World Cup, Schmidt says he's going to announce his future before the end of the year.
Oh, look, I don't think it will change anything. I don't think Joe's suddenly surprised everyone or become something that nobody didn't already know that he was. He's clearly an outstanding coach. I mean, look how good Ireland have become in the period that he's been coaching them. I mean, they really do, genuinely. I know the world ranking's probably still number 2, but I think genuinely, you're looking at them now, I mean, if they are number 2, it's only just, isn't it? They're right up there as the best team in the world. You don't win as many games as they do without being well coached. So no, I don't think that's really going to change a great deal. I think that Steve Hansen's got a pretty good record himself. Let's not forget that. And if he wants to stay on as All Blacks coach, I think that's an opportunity that's been put to him. Do you want to go on beyond 2019? So I think that's kind of stage one. He's got to determine whether he's going to stay on or whether he's pulling out. And if he is pulling out, then look, Joe's going to be an outstanding candidate. I don't think what happened on Saturday will have much of a bearing on that at all. I think if he applied for the job, he'd be pretty hard to turn down long before he beat the All Blacks.
That's interesting, because we kind of assumed that there was the prerequisite really for somebody who wanted the All Blacks job to be already in the system in New Zealand. Perhaps for somebody like Joe Schmidt, you make an exception?
Oh, they've got various rules and regulations, but from memory, they're always willing to make exceptions. So I think effectively, I think Hansen and Henry were appointed on exceptions because they both came out of Wales into the All Blacks job. So, look, I think if Joe put his hand up, if the job became available and Joe put his hand up, I don't think the New Zealand Rugby Union are going to say, but you haven't been coaching in New Zealand, Joe. Sorry, we're not going to give you the job. Look, the most important thing to coach the All Blacks, despite what any rules might say, is having experience in international rugby. And, right now, if you didn't make Joe Schmidt the next All Blacks coach, who would you? I mean, he's clearly, there's an internal candidate who would be Ian Foster, who's already with the All Blacks, but other than Foster, where else are the All Blacks going to go? I mean, clearly Joe's going to be the guy. If the job becomes available, they're going to make a pretty big play and persuade him to come home and take it.
Hansen has said he's going to make his decision before Christmas. Joe Schmidt has said he's going to make his announcement sometime in the next couple of weeks as well. The paranoid Irish rugby fans are looking at that and it's like, oh, these timings are all coalescing very nicely here. What's your instinct on what's going to happen?
Well, I would imagine that there's clearly a bit of a rapport between Schmidt and Hansen. They clearly have a lot of respect for one another. They're quite friendly. I would imagine that Steve has already told Joe what his intentions are. He hasn't told anyone else, Hansen. We don't know what he's going to do. So I genuinely don't know if he's going to move on or if he's going to stand aside. But I suspect that he's already made his mind up. And he's already come to an agreement with the New Zealand Rugby Union, whichever way he's going to go. And I suspect that he's told Joe what he's doing, whether he's staying or whether he's going. And I would imagine that will have a bearing on what Joe is going to do. And if Steve is staying on, I would imagine that Joe is probably staying on with Ireland. And if Steve is moving on from the All Blacks, I'd imagine that Joe is probably sitting there going, well, I'm probably going to have a tilt at the All Blacks job.
Yeah, you mentioned the obvious qualities that Steve Hansen has as a coach, and I do wonder if he's underrated hugely in this part of the world. Like, I do wonder, say if you flip the tables on Saturday night, if Steve Hansen was Ireland coach and Joe Schmidt was All Blacks coach, would we have had the same result?
Look, that's an impossible question to answer. It's too difficult to know what would happen. Look, Hansen's been brilliant for the All Blacks. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, anyone could coach the All Blacks. Look at the players that they've got. But, the players just don't fall out of trees and and happen to arrive like that. I mean, they have to be moulded into that. They have to be developed like that. They have to, they have to come through a system where ultimately the All Black coach has a fair amount of say, across the country around, the skill sets and the type of rugby that they want to see played, and then that filters down to Super Rugby, and then they try and build these players and having the right sort of skills that the All Blacks are after. So there's a whole kind of pyramid, as it is in Ireland. I'm sure it's the same kind of thing. But Hansen's been brilliant. He's been a fantastic selector. He's barely picked a dud. He's barely lost a game. I mean, I don't know, what have they lost? 7-8 test matches in 7-8 years, which, that's almost why it's such a big deal when they do lose, because it happens so rarely now. So whenever they lose, which, once a year, twice a year, it becomes a sort of big inquest. What went wrong here? You got to sort of remember that it's not normal to only lose one game a year or two games a year over such a long period. I know Ireland have had that kind of year at the moment, but, they don't always have that kind of year. In fact, they rarely have that kind of year where they only lose one game. So this is what the norm is for the All Blacks, what Ireland are going through at the moment. That's a kind of normal season. So you put that into perspective and go, wow, no previous All Blacks coach has been able to deliver those kind of results. And the other thing you have to remember, and Hansen said it a few times when he was in Ireland, every time the All Blacks play, the team that they play against, and Ireland proved it again on the weekend, are going to have one of those amazing days where they find another 10% in their own performance because they're so determined to knock over the All Blacks. And I think everyone could see that, Ireland's determination to win that game was quite phenomenal. And, if they weren't playing the USA this weekend, if they were off to go and play South Africa, say, in Dublin, I'd be interested to see how they coped, because I'm not sure that Ireland would be able to get up and knock over South Africa after what they put into that game against the All Blacks.
We'd be pretty confident.
I'm sure. No, they're a great team, but it is hard to drain the tank like that and then back up and do it again.
It's a fair point. We're 11 months out from the World Cup. We've got plenty of prognosticating to do between now and then. Gregor, I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you had a good night on Saturday in Dublin either way.
Did indeed.
Nice one. Gregor Paul from the New Zealand Herald. Thanks a million for joining us.